Between world wars and civil war in China, authority fractured. Lhasa asserted autonomy, minted its own currency, and navigated between neighbors. Britain faded. Newly independent India inherited anxieties and treaties. For a while, the plateau's distance looked like protection again, but a state rising in the east saw vulnerability instead. For the People's Republic, declared in 1949, those highlands were a frontier to secure, not a buffer to tolerate. The logic flipped. Emptiness needed a plan. In 1951, the 17-point agreement announced Tibet's peaceful liberation and promised autonomy within the PRC. The People's Liberation Army entered not as a raid, but as an administrative project. The first moves mirrored the terrain, gripped the nodes. Garrisons and offices went up in Lhasa and Shigatse, airstrips were carved where valleys allowed, roads stitched across passes the way caravans once did. The pattern wasn't a swarm, it was a net. Towns became knots, the open land stayed open but watched. Those early roads mattered as much as flags. The Sichuan, Tibet and Qinghai, Tibet highways clawed across permafrost and scree, hauling diesel, cement, and carders into places that had never seen a motor. Each bridge changed local economies. Caravans lost their edge. Grain and uniforms moved faster than rumor. Surveillance could travel. The state didn't need to fill the plateau to change it. It only needed corridors strong enough to move decisions uphill and resources downhill. Population strategy followed that infrastructure logic. Secure hubs first. Encourage workers, traders, and administrators into the towns. Keep the grasslands thin. Mobility that once protected herds now looked like evasion to government, mapping taxes, schools, and rules. Sedentarization would come later. At first, checkpoints and registries did the work. The emptiness beyond the highways wasn't a failure to populate, it was a choice to concentrate. There was pushback. In 1959, after tensions over reforms, taxes, and fears for the Dalai Lama's safety erupted in Lhasa, an uprising met force. The diaspora began. Monasteries, the engines of education and social life, came under tighter control. The state deepened its hold on the nodes and widened the gaps between them. In the 1960s, upheaval swept all of China, and the plateau's networks took another turn toward command. When the country later opened and reformed, those corridors stayed. New asphalt, same geometry. Here's the quiet contradiction. The PRC's core doctrine prized development and population growth, yet in Tibet, much of the land remained deliberately empty. Why preserve emptiness if numbers mean strength? Because in a place where altitude, distance, and water define leverage, emptiness can serve power. Fewer people in the hinterland make movement easier to monitor. Fewer villages near borders reduce friction during standoffs. Fewer settlements along rivers simplify dam sites, transmission lines, and resettlement plans. Meanwhile, legitimacy required building. Investment flowed to the hubs, hospitals in Lhasa, campuses, housing blocks, new markets. Subsidies sweetened life where oxygen thins. Migration policy added layers, encouraging cadres and technical workers to rotate through while pushing herders to settle for services. The plateau's economy shifted toward nodes by design. The empty spaces didn't disappear, they receded behind checkpoints and policy goals. External borders pulled on this strategy. Undefined lines in the west and east with India, a long seam with Nepal and Bhutan, each demanded roads, depots, and airfields at altitude. Emptiness near those edges became a buffer no insurance company could price. If a crisis flared, there were fewer civilians at risk, fewer evacuations, fewer hostages to escalation. Troops could maneuver on roads meant for both freight and force. The landscape amplified that logic. High passes are narrow, valleys funnel movement. Control them, and you don't need to occupy the plains. But the pivotal lever sat in the riverbeds. The same corridors that carried subsidies could carry turbines. Upstream of nations downstream, dams promised power and timing control. To use that leverage, the state needed securable headwaters more than sprawling towns. Emptiness helps keep a grip on headwaters. Patrols see farther. Projects face fewer local vetoes. A sparse map is easier to redraw. This was the moment policy met terrain and chose the same lines. The empire had buffered by absence. The modern state buffered by corridors. Emptiness didn't vanish, it was curated. And because the plateau's rivers reach far beyond its borders, that curation wasn't only domestic. It set the stage for upstream advantage. Emptiness, leveraged through water, height, and distance, would become a quiet instrument of power. The water tower of Asia, headwaters as leverage. Follow the rivers and you follow power. Up here, 7 great systems pick up their first threads, the Indus and its Sutlej arm to the west, the Brahmaputra born as the Yarlung Tsangpo, slicing east before it U-turns into India, the Salween and Mekong dropping through gorges toward Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam, the Yangtze and Yellow turning China's heartland green and then brown with silt. They don't just pass through the plateau, they're made by it. What this means upstream is simple. Timing decides fortunes. A dam gate opened a week earlier can shave the top off a flood downstream. A gate held closed can store the pulse for when grids need megawatts at dusk or fields need a steadier trickle in April. None of this changes how much water falls from the sky over a year, but it does change when it arrives and at what speed. In places where farmers set planting by river height or fishers time nets by dry season flow, that calendar is everything. On the Yarlung Tsangpo, the Zangmu hydropower station anchored the first cascade on the Tibetan side, part of a ladder of dams including Gyatso, Gyacha and Jiksu. These are run-of-river plants, which means they generally don't hold back years of water, but their reservoirs can still shift daily and weekly rhythms. Downstream in India, after the river becomes the Siang and then the Brahmaputra, small changes in shoulder season flow can tilt power generation plans and irrigation schedules. After the Brahmaputra slows into the Assam plains, silt is a blessing and a burden. Timing alters how much is spread and where it settles. Eastward, the Mekong offers a clearer lesson. Its headwaters rise in Tibetan ranges before cutting south into Yunnan and then through mainland Southeast Asia. China's upstream dams, Xirao, Nujiadu and others, have been shown to buffer floods and also intensify dry season low flows when reservoirs store water for power. Communities on the Tonle Sap, the lake that famously reverses flow with the Mekong's pulse, feel those shifts in fish catches and planting patterns. When the upstream calendar slides, boats come back lighter and markets reflect it. Upstream advantage isn't just concrete, it's information. Gauges high on the plateau see floods early. Data shared or withheld becomes leverage. Between China and downstream countries, there are memoranda of understanding for flood season data sharing, but no basin-wide binding treaties along the lines of the Indus Waters Treaty. On the Brahmaputra, India and China exchange hydrological data at certain stations during monsoon months. On the Mekong, China is not a full member of the Mekong River Commission, but provides data through the Langkang-Mekong Cooperation Framework. Those arrangements help, but they're patchwork. They leave room for suspicion when flows don't match expectation. For states downstream, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the stakes are concrete and human. Pakistan's canals feed from the Indus, whose snowmelt signature starts in Tibetan and Karakoram ice. India's northeast knows the Brahmaputra as both lifeline and threat. A swollen monsoon brings fertile silt and sudden ruin. Bangladesh lives inside a delta that breathes with seasonal pulses. The right kind of flood is life. The wrong timing is disaster. Lower Mekong villages set their year by a river that used to be more predictable than the price of rice. When timing shifts, costs show up not only on hydrographs, but in calories, cash, and migration. Inside China, the story is twin-headed. The Yangtze's upper reaches rise in the plateau's cold, and its flow supports hydropower giants downstream. The Yellow River's sediment, much of it loess, some from plateau headwaters, has always complicated management. More storage upstream can modulate flow, but can't erase 1,000 years of silt. For Beijing, upstream control is national security wrapped as development. Power for factories, water for cities, and flood control for megadeltas where tens of millions live. There's the unbuilt specter too, diversions. Proposals have circulated for years about transferring Brahmaputra headwaters north or east toward drier basins. The grandest schemes would punch tunnels through rock that makes engineers sweat. None of those mega-diversions exist in practice on the Yarlung Tsangpo, and official messaging emphasizes hydropower, not interbasin transfer. Still, the idea shapes anxieties. If upstream can time water, could it someday reroute it? Even rumors move politics. Zoom back to the cascade logic. In narrow gorges, the most efficient plants sit close together. Each dam flattens turbulence for the next, squeezing more electricity from the same drop in elevation. But cumulative effects ripple downstream. Peaking operations can send daily surges. Sediment gets trapped, starving floodplains of nutrients. Fish migration routes shrink unless ladders or bypasses actually work at this scale. In the Mekong Basin, studies have tied upstream peaking to unusual low flows in recent drought years, even as official releases cited limited storage. On the Brahmaputra, India's planned dams in Arunachal Pradesh are framed as counterweights, catch what China modulates, add flexibility on the Indian side. Meanwhile, climate change is reshuffling the deck. Glaciers are retreating, snowlines are rising, and permafrost is thawing. In the near term, meltwater boosts flow, a deceptive bonus. Later, as ice stocks shrink, dry season baseflow could fall. For upstream planners, that argues for more storage to smooth volatility. For downstream farmers, it argues for transparency and rules so that a thinner glacier century doesn't also mean a thinner harvest. All of this loops back to emptiness. To hold the water, you need to hold the heights and the rails to reach them. Fewer settlements along headwaters simplify land acquisition, resettlement, and security. Patrols can watch valleys where the only movement is scheduled. Maintenance crews can reach gates without weaving through village politics. The plateau's open spaces, which once kept people moving, now keep projects manageable. Control of timing, backed by concrete and corridors, turns geography into quiet power. Steel over sky, railways, roads, and controlled corridors. Steel had to learn to breathe thin air. When planners drew the Qinghai-Tibet Railway from Xining to Lhasa, they weren't just laying track, they were solving altitude. Engines lose power where oxygen thins, so locomotives came with turbocharging tuned for 5,000 meters. Passenger cars got pumped with supplemental oxygen. Under the rails, permafrost wanted to heave and slump, so engineers lifted the track on embankments, slid thermosiphons into the ground to wick heat upward, and spread crushed rock to vent the cold. It wasn't elegant, it was relentless pragmatism. Keep the line straight, keep the ground frozen, keep trains on time. When the line opened, it stitched a continent to a rooftop. Diesel, grain, rebar, and people began moving in measured pulses. But notice where the steel goes. It hugs valleys, skirts basins, and touches only where towns already hold. Lhasa turned from a highland capital into a logistics hub. Depots stacked with pipes, transformers, and fuel drums anchored a new tempo. The vast hinterland stayed mostly untouched because the railway wasn't built to populate the empty. It was built to feed the nodes that control the empty. Extensions pushed the logic forward. West to Shigatse, the track ran along the Yarlung Tsangpo Valley, lowering the cost of moving cement and turbines to hydropower sites. East to Nyingchi, it crept toward the deep gorges where the river becomes a strategic question for two countries at once. Each spur is a statement. Densify junctions, leap between them, and leave distances open. Roads mirror the same pattern, wide, all-weather highways laid across passes, with avalanche sheds where slopes shed rock and snow, and with fiber lines zigzagging in the shadow of cutbanks. Corridor urbanization does more than move goods. It concentrates life where the state can service and see it. Hospitals, schools, housing blocks, and markets cluster by stations and highway interchanges. Subsidies and salaries pull people there, oxygen masks and heating systems keep them. Beyond the pavement, the grasslands remain thin, dotted with checkposts, radio towers, and occasional sheep pens. The emptiness isn't accidental sprawl that never happened. It's a canvas left clear so the brushstrokes, rail, road, power line, show cleanly. All of it wears a dual-use badge. A freight wagon that brings flour can bring armor. A siding that stores ballast can store fuel. Bridges designed for heavy axle loads don't ask if the wheels carry corn or tracked vehicles. On maps, the corridor is development. In contingency plans, it's a mobilization lane. Altitude punishes speed for outsiders. Acclimatization demands days. Trains shrink that penalty for those who control the timetable. A brigade pre-positioned near a siding at 3,500 meters has a home field advantage written in oxygen. Permafrost still demands rent. Summer thaw undercuts embankments. Crews inject grouted piles, add culverts, and lay reflective membranes to keep heat out of the soil. Winter frost cracks asphalt, Maintenance becomes governance, routine, visible, unglamorous. To the west, gravel beds rattle under daily trains. To the east, tunnels through granite earn their keep by shaving hours off moves that once took days. Every fix ties the corridor tighter to the land and to the people who depend on it. The corridors also steer industry. Hydropower turbines arrive in convoys, nacelles wrapped against dust. Mines tap copper and lithium where ore meets road, not where ore hides behind 7 days of mule track. Tourism rides the rails too. Coaches full of cameras and disposable oxygen packs step off at stations landscaped like postcards. Money follows gradients of accessibility. If a place is one good road from a siding, it grows. If it's 5 days of trackless plateau, it stays a rumor. Meanwhile, power lines march alongside steel. Ultra-high voltage lines leap valleys, carrying electrons from dams toward distant grids. Substations mushroom where river meets rail yard. Timing control, the ability to open or close a gate at the right hour, needs crews on site and parts on hand. The corridor delivers both, and security with them. Fences are easier to defend than fields. Patrols need pavement, not prayer flags. For local towns, the railway changes breakfast. Vegetables arrive fresher, fuel cheaper, and wages steadier for those who can read the timetable. But the pattern holds. Growth hugs the line, silence presses against the fence. Off-corridor villages watch trucks pass but don't see them turn. That's the point. Concentration simplifies services, surveillance, and sudden decisions. It also allows planners to leave large spaces purposefully thin, buffers against wildfire, flood, or border flare. And the borders matter. Lines to Nyingchi push closer to frontier where altitude shapes standoffs. Roads to airfields lengthen runways and shorten response times. The empty between corridors becomes a cushion, no towns to evacuate, fewer lives in harm's way if a convoy must move, fewer eyes to stir rumor. The plateau's emptiness, once a product of climate, now doubles as policy. Steel over sky doesn't erase distance. It weaponizes it, turning narrow corridors into levers that move a continent-sized highland.